Facebook Live event. My name is Gerry Friesen, also known as the Recovering Farmer. I am a stress and conflict management specialist working out of Manitoba. Because of my own journey with mental illness, I have a real passion in talking about it, because it is in talking to others we can find a path forward for ourselves. You can learn more about me by visiting gerryfriesen.ca. Through this Facebook Live event, I am representing the Stigma-Free Society, which is a Canadian registered charity that aims to reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. This event is part of their Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, an online community-based mental health program that creates access to mental health education and peer support training, as well as practical and relatable resources for those living in rural and agricultural communities. You can find the toolkit at ruralmentalwellness.com, and I'll repeat that again at the end. I am excited today to have the opportunity to chat with Allan Kehler. Thank you, Allan, for joining us. How are you?
Gerry, I'm living the dream. Doing well.
Oh, that's perfect. Your insights into mental health, obviously, and wellness certainly have resonated with me, as I'm sure they have. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong page. See, that's what I do when I get flustered, and that's what happens when we have technical issues. Before we jump in, let me just read a short bio on Allan. Allan is a mental health advocate, international keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 4 books. He is one of Canada's most sought-after speakers when it comes to the topic of mental health and wellness. He has stood on more than 500 stages and is recognized for his engaging style and captivating approach. Allan uses humor and compassion to create a safe place where people feel seen, heard, and supported. I checked out Allan's webpage yesterday and was interested in the story he's going to be talking about today, because I know it certainly his journey mirrors one that I'm on as well. So Allan, can you start by telling our audience a bit about your personal mental health journey and what led you to your mental health advocacy work?
Definitely. And, it's interesting, Gerry, because as a kid, I didn't exactly grow up hoping that one day I could struggle with mental illness or that one day I could become an addict. I did not ever grow up wanting to be a motivational speaker. Life has been fascinating. And I think for me, when I look back at the life that I've led, like Gerry, there is no reason that I should still be vertical after the life that I've led, other than the only conclusion I have arrived at is I feel like I'm here to carry a message.
Yeah.
That's it. And so opportunities like this to sit down with you or to share some of my lived experiences is done with so much gratitude, humility. And so, yeah, I appreciate you, Gerry, Madeline, for making this happen. And anybody who's watching, off we go.
Yeah, so we're 15 minutes late, but that's not going to stop us, is it?
No, exactly. And this, Gerry, it's very hard to be able to just go through your story in a short amount of time. But the short and sweet version is this. I grew up in small town Saskatchewan, and I do mean small. Like, we had 4.5 roads, and that last half road was gravel. And in that environment, it's like living in a fishbowl where everyone kind of knows your business. Now, my challenges with mental illness really started when I was 13 years old. And it started with body dysmorphic disorder, where I just could not look in mirrors. My thoughts started to become distorted. And I realized very quickly that my thoughts were very different. But the problem was this. I had formed an identity in that small community as someone who had excelled in athletics, in academics. I was president of the school, athlete of the year, captain of sports teams. And I did not have a clue how to talk about some of my pain. And plus, in that small community, it wasn't modeled. I never knew anybody who struggled with mental health. I didn't even know what the word mental illness was.
Yeah, people didn't talk about it.
No. And so the reality is this. I was the one who suffered in silence, and that was a choice. But then obviously it becomes very lonely. And my challenges with mental health really intensified And, fast forward a couple of years, finally, I was able to get myself in to see a doctor. I was able to get some formal help. And then Gerry, in a span of 6 years, I was put on a combination of 12 different pharmaceutical pills. I met with so many psychologists, psychiatrists. I was hammered with all these labels. Now, as someone who had no identity and had started to become absorbed in the world of substance use and a compulsive gambler and self-injurious behaviors, all this whirlwind, you give me a label and I was like, oh, that's who I am? So I just, ingested it. And it was just chaos.
Yeah.
The short and sweet is I spent most of my life trying to harm or kill myself without really an understanding of the why.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about, trying to kill yourself, as it were, what was a lot of that an intentional action on your part, or was it just that you realized later that, hey, you know what, a lot of the stuff I did was harming myself and could have ultimately, like you said at the outset, you're surprised you're vertical.
Oh yes, I am. And a lot of it was just unintentional. I didn't care. I put myself in harm's way repeatedly. And on the other hand, though, the world was always my stage, and everybody always saw a completely different Allan. And that speaks to that proverbial mask where, correct me if I'm wrong, but just because someone's smiling does not mean that they are happy. And so I was an educator. And one of the turning points was where I was teaching at a junior high school in Edmonton. I was teaching special ed, Gerry, and I collapsed in the hallway. And I remember all these students are looking over me and they're like, oh, Mr. K, are you okay? Oh, yeah, no, I'm good. Well, I was not good. I had been, recently given that month to live from a doctor because my lifestyle was all about alcohol, gambling. I was having seizures every day, but nobody knew. And that's what hurts my heart looking back. I had pushed away most people. And so I didn't know who to go to or what to do with that pain. But you reach a point where usually you figure out pretty quick that, oh, hang on, wait, if you want something different, you have to do something different. And that was one of those proverbial forks in the road.
Okay. So what did you do different?
The number one thing that has helped me navigate through my challenges with mental health is I made a conscious decision to surround myself with others who spoke my language. And when I say spoke my language, I mean, I was very intentional about getting myself into support groups with others who had similar lived experiences, whether that was a bipolar support group, Gamblers Anonymous. And Gerry, that was so hard because especially when it comes to gambling, I would go to these support groups. There were never young men like me, ever. And so I felt so alienated and alone. And I actually remember sitting in my car in a church parking lot before that first meeting, crying so uncontrollably, being so terrified, knowing that if I open up that car door and if I walk into that building, it's real.
Yeah.
Because denial is much more comfortable. But what happened is, as soon as I got myself into that space and I started hearing my story through others, what? Oh, I'm not alone in this? And I felt good. And I realized very quickly that emotions are energy. And as soon as I was able to free myself from some of that pain, I felt better.
Yeah.
So eventually I got myself into AA. I got myself into the Saskatoon Sexual Assault Center for other men who've been sexually abused. That one, Gerry, was that was still to this day probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But being vulnerable, while it's very painful and I found it to be very difficult, it also is the reason I'm still here, and it's also what has been so rewarding.
Yeah. Isn't being vulnerable actually almost life-giving to oneself?
100%. 100%. And I think that vulnerability naturally will breed vulnerability, won't it?
Absolutely. And I just know from my own experience when I started talking about it publicly, and like you, I was hiding it well. But when I started coming out with my own story and what I was experiencing and what I was living, it's interesting how other people gravitate towards that. And even people I had known and hadn't realized that they were having these life experiences, they start opening up, right?
I feel as though the two most powerful words, hands down, are me too.
Yeah.
And just like you, Gerry, I mean, as soon as I started to share my story at a public level, offer some strategies, people start saying, me too, I get it. What? That's awesome.
Absolutely. It feels so good. Because
Yeah.
like you say, we suffer in silence, right?
Right, which is a choice.
Say a little more about that.
I think that, okay, so what motivates me more than anything, why I do what I do, is because the next generation is always watching. You know, especially when we talk about men and mental health. I never saw that modeled. And while that made it difficult for me to reach out for help or to talk about my pain, at the end of the day, it was still a choice. And choice when it comes to mental health and addictions is a very delicate word, isn't it? Because choice for me always felt like it was kind of taken away. When I would struggle with mental illness, it was very dark and my thoughts were so convoluted. And then with addictions, I felt like I didn't have a choice. But at the end of the day, I have learned the importance of taking ownership of where I am. And I hope that through what you and I do, it can help other people to make that conscious choice of reaching out for help. And so the more that people can see us, hear what we've gone through, and understand that vulnerability is a strength, it is not a weakness, then hopefully that can empower them to move forward in that.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. And when you talk about, talking to others, I know when I went to your website, you talked about a turning point. In one of your short videos, you talk about a turning point where I believe it was a professor at the university you were going to called you into his office. And I was just sitting here. I was interviewed by a different organization earlier this week. And again, I talked about a turning point in my journey. And it was a similar experience to what you had. I wish you could talk about, or I hope you can talk about that to our audience today.
Yeah. Timing is interesting because there were numerous moments where I was struggling and somebody would reach out, but I just wasn't quite there. What you're alluding to, Gerry, was a time when a professor had opened up that door and I was ready to talk. And I mean, I was a student at the University of Alberta in a class with probably 300 other students. And the professor, whose name is Ian McNeil, approached me after the lecture. And all he said is, "Come to my office, Al. Let's talk." And I thought, well, that's interesting. I've talked to you a handful of times. I don't know why you're extending that invite to me, but okay. So I gave myself permission to be vulnerable that afternoon, and I did walk into his office. And what I found interesting about his approach is after I sat down, he said, "How are you doing today, Allan?" And I thought to myself, that's unique. That's different. Usually it's the robotic "how you're doing," which, okay, that's a greeting. He made it personal. But what else he did is he set the tone. You know, there was compassion. There was no judgment. He was leaning forward. He was engaged. And at that moment, I kind of took off the proverbial mask and I just talked. And the beautiful thing was this: Ian understood that there's a reason that we have two ears and one mouth. He just listened. He created the space for me to be free from a lot of that pain. And Ian also understood that we all want to feel a sense of power. We all want to feel as though we're in control. So he spun it back to me. And basically the question he said, "Are you happy?" Ian, man, no, I'm not happy. And the question was, well, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And so he put me at that fork in the road, and then he offered up resources. And I realized that if I wanted to succeed at an academic level, if I wanted to just make it through a couple more days, I was going to have to access the resources. And so thanks to him, I reached out to, I think it was called Students Disability Services, something like that. And I got note takers, I got tutors. I started writing exams in rooms by myself. It was so embarrassing because I had always excelled. Even like 2 years before that at the university, I was in the top 5% of academic achievement, but with addictions, struggles with mental illness, everything deteriorated. What he did is not only did he offer those resources, but he continuously checked in on me. And when I look back at it, really what he did is he never fixed me.
Yeah.
He created this space where he allowed me to be seen. He allowed me to be heard. And lastly, ultimately, to be supported. So really in, those 10 minutes, that man, Ian McNeil, hands down, changed my entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've found myself, Allan, is I even today, even in my ongoing journey, I spend a lot of time with thoughts running rampant in my head. And if I don't verbalize them, they stay up there, right? And the ability to verbalize them just pukes them out on the table, so to speak. And it does one of a few things. Number one is it frees your brain of those thoughts. And number two is actually you can now assess those thoughts, and some of them you can go, wow, those sure are ridiculous, aren't they?
Yeah, you say it well. We have to get out of our heads. There was an elder who once told me, it's okay to let the bird in your mind, but do not let it make a nest. And what you're talking about is just that. Talk therapy can get some of that out. Now, I never trusted people. I still don't. I'm working on it. But I learned very quickly that you can tell a piece of paper anything. And so writing became a very powerful strategy for me to be free from some of this. I had to get it out. To this day, I will go into the backyard and have a burning ceremony where I just release things that are no longer serving me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful, you saying that, Allan. You know, I find it interesting, and actually a colleague that I've worked with on mental wellness for going on 14 years now. Actually, when she saw this interview coming up on this Facebook Live event, sent me an email and said, I can't believe it. There's actually going to be two men talking about mental health and mental wellness and mental illness. She says, that's so awesome. And so you've kind of touched on that a wee bit, but I'd like to hear from you how, there's that stigma attached to men, right? And how, well, I know certainly from my generation, you didn't have mental illness. You weren't working hard enough, or you weren't praying hard enough, or you weren't doing whatever hard enough. And so that stigma, although it's starting to release somewhat, we still see it out there. How can we work more on changing that?
We need more Gerrys in this world. That's what we need.
Well, I would say more Allans, but okay, how about together?
It's on one hand, it saddens me to hear that is still the truth, isn't it? Because there are still so many headlines out there that will read something like, women seek help, men die.
Yeah.
And when you look at the suicide rates, we are, as men, about 3 times greater. We die at a suicide rate that's 3 times greater than women. I think it's actually like 3.6 to be exact. And it's everything that you talk about, those old stereotypes, this old belief of what it means to be a man, the independence. This stuff cannot be fixed with duct tape. I wish it could. I see an incredible shift. And even in the last book that I wrote on men and mental health, it was exactly what you're asking, which led up to that book. I wanted to know, what are these barriers? How can we shatter them? And there's nothing that can do that like someone's story. Stories are what connects us, unites us. They're sacred. And so that was the format that I chose. And I also asked that all of these men put their face by their story. And it was because of this. I wanted to make sure that these were people who were at a place, and not everyone is, which is fine, but they're at a place where they said, I'm done with the shame. I'm done with the hiding. This is what I have been through. And that was a powerful, powerful thing. But here, Gerry, is what I found the most surprising, and I'm gonna guess you can probably relate to this. So when we're trying to identify all of the barriers as to the why are men so hesitant to reach out for help? Why do we reach out for help when we're hurt at a physical level but not emotional? So the fears, I mean, I'm sure they're the same now. This perception of being weak, perceived as lesser than, maybe being perceived as incompetent in our place of work, on and on and on.
Yeah.
What I found after all the interviews is what the men thought was going to happen did not happen. They thought that they were going to be judged. No, they were actually met with compassion, dare I say, love. But more importantly, they all said the same thing, which I can relate to. When they finally put a voice to their pain, they felt free.
Yeah.
They no longer had to hide behind that proverbial mask. And like you've already said, Gerry, as soon as they started to share their story, maybe even in a rural setting, damn it, they weren't the only one. And then you think to yourself, what a waste.
Exactly. So with your experience, Allan, do you see a difference between men in an urban setting perhaps and compared to men in rural settings?
Yeah, 100%. It's no different than I was talking to an educator who lives in a very small community right now, and there's still that shame of pulling up to the doctor's office in his car, that people are going to look at the license plate and realize that, oh, he's getting help. Maybe it's about his mental health. He doesn't get his prescriptions filled in that community. He has to drive to the closest city. And it's still very risky for a lot of people because there is this legitimate fear that should you disclose this, people might perceive you differently. And maybe that's because of the stigma that continues to exist, which is why information is power.
Absolutely, it is. And I've been encouraged. I started talking about my story in 2010, actually. And interestingly enough, I was facilitating workshops called Men and Depression, and it was geared particularly for men in agriculture. And when I was asked to speak after that, I always chuckled a little bit when the organization would say, well, we'll leave 10 minutes for a Q&A. And I'd chuckle and say, nah, there won't be any questions because people just simply don't ask questions, right? And yet in later years, just in the last year or two, it's interesting how people are opening up, even in public. Like there's less shame attached to it. There's less stigma attached to it. We see more about it out, in the media. We see, I focus a lot on agriculture and the way the federal governments or the federal government and the provincial governments are starting to zero in on the fact that there are significant mental health issues in rural Canada. So it's so awesome to see that it is starting to break down.
Agreed. And especially amongst farmers, egg producers, the external stressors are remarkable. So many variables are completely out of your control. And I think that part of the key for me in terms of my wellness has really been, okay, let me just step back, get out of my head, focus on what I can control and release the rest. Because the definition of anxiety for me is very simple. It's trying to control the things that are out of my control. And it's a beautiful thing, whether it's the farm helplines, the rural helplines, like there are numerous resources. We live in a world where it's literally at our fingertips, but for some of us, it's a massive hurdle to make that call. But if we can empower people to just take the risk, I always say, I promise you, you will be rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you talked about earlier about all the mental health professionals you've seen. And you know what? Mental health, as you and I know well, is an intricate thing. It's not as easy to fix as a broken leg or a broken shoulder. It's something, and sometimes it takes more than, I often tell people I talk to, well, if the first visit doesn't, if the first professional doesn't work, go to a second one, get a third or fourth opinion. Shoot, I think when I count on my hand, I think I was at about the seventh or eighth one before finally there were dots connected, right? And yeah, nobody healed me, just like you talked about before in the conversation you had. Nobody healed me, but at least things were starting to make sense, and there were things that I knew I now could do to try and get better.
Good for you. I love hearing that. I love that you were persistent. It's no different than in life. Sometimes we connect with individuals, sometimes we don't. And I love that persistence. And also, to your point, Gerry, yeah, we are the ones who have to do the work. I used to want people to make me feel better. I remember interviewing Chris Beaudry, who is the assistant coach of the Humboldt Broncos. He's the one who pulled up to that horrific crash 15 minutes after it happened. And he says it perfectly. He says, you reach a point where you realize that when you look in the mirror, it's you who has to do the work. Nobody's going to do it for you. We create our own happiness.
Exactly. And the day we give up on that, we lose even more.
Yeah. And I guess having said that, it's also imperative to look at who we let into our inner circle, isn't it? Because, with addiction, I surrounded myself with people who didn't care about me as a person. And I really had to cut ties with people who were not lifting me up, who were bringing me down. And so just to ensure that I now have people around me who are like-minded, who really want me to be the best version of me.
Exactly. Allan, time flies when we have conversations like this, and I see we're getting closer to the end of our half hour, but you know what? You've written 4 books. Can you just say a little bit about those books?
The books were always bigger than me. Speaking is always bigger than me. I guess, Gerry, I just feel like I'm this, I'm not even sure what the word would be, a channel, a medium, it's like, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. And I just ask that my gifts can be used. And so through the books wrote themselves. I was kind of given some clarity. I said this before. I think that stories are the best way to convey certain messaging. And so 2 of the 4 books are people's personal stories. The first one was on addictions because that was new to me. Like, I was actually only 3 months sober when I moved from Edmonton to Saskatoon, and I moved in with my now wife and her 2 kids. I didn't have a lot to offer. But what's interesting about that is sometimes we do need people who believe in us more than we believe in ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that book on addictions, that was relevant because that's what I was still going through. And then one was on resiliency, because I'm a firm believer that, like our clothing line, I really do believe that we were born resilient. We come into this world kicking and screaming, and that will serve us well if we can buy into that. And this last book, on men and mental health, that was near and dear to me because that's what we're trying to do right now. We're just trying to strengthen that conversation.
Perfect. That sounds awesome. And I would challenge, and towards the end, I want you to give everybody your website so that people can go there and see what you have to offer, because I think it's absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
What do you do to keep mentally well? Drink tea?
Drink herbal tea. No, actually, I usually have 2 large doubles a day from Tim Hortons.
Okay, good. Perfect.
That is a key to my wellness. I think I kind of go back to the big 3 often: walk, talk, write. I think it's important, to do something physical. I have a lot of work to do in that area. I'm getting a very good dad bod, actually. But we talked about this too. Get the stuff out of our head. Be free from some of those emotions that do not serve us well. So I talk about it. I write about some of the pain. I had a reporter recently, he's interviewing me. He's like, oh, wow, motivational speaker must be nice to always be so upbeat. No, the reality is I find life very hard. But the difference is I have people in place and supports that will ensure that I never go down that dark of a path again.
Yeah. And that's so important. So very important. I appreciate that, Allan. Any final message you would like to leave our audience?
I guess I would hope that if anyone listening is at that place where it's getting rather difficult to navigate through life, that you give yourself permission to be vulnerable, to take that risk, and that you reach out for help. When I look back, I can understand that there were so many hands reaching out. I was just so afraid to reach back.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much, Allan. I really appreciate that. And like I said at the outset, and I know it even better now, is you and I could probably spend a few hours talking about some of this stuff. And I really like talking to someone who's obviously on a similar journey to what I am. Your insights into mental health and wellness certainly have resonated with me, as I'm sure they have with our audience. And just like I like to say to people, talk about it. And Alberta actually has a program called Tough Enough to Talk About It, and that's geared particularly for men. I'm a big proponent of sharing stories, because I think sharing stories one-on-one with people can help them, can help yourself as well. David Richardson, the co-founder of Stigma-Free Society, says in one of his videos, it's okay to have challenges, it's okay to be different, and it's okay to need help. And I think that's so very important. So if you're struggling today, make sure you reach out and talk about it. And also, everybody in the audience, please avail yourself of the many resources available in the Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, which can be found at the ruralmentalwellness.com. But you know what? Just as I read that website, I just remembered, Allan, I'd like you to share your website with folks so that they can look you up.
Yeah, for sure. It's just AllanKehler.com. AllanKehler.com.
All right. Well, thanks again, Allan, and to everybody else that's watching this. Till next time, stay safe and be well.
Thanks, Gerry. Thanks, everyone. Bye.